Hello, my name's Janet Henfrey, and this is a little video of what I can remember of my very privileged and happy life, working mostly in theatre with a little film and television as well. I hope you enjoy.
So Janet, lovely to see you today. Thank you for welcoming me into your home. We're going to start with the What Happened To series, which is a 25 quick-fire questionnaire. So let's start with question number 1. What is your full name given at birth?
My full name is Janet Ethne Anne Henfrey. My mother's name was Ethne, and I always wished I'd changed it to Ethne when I came into the business, but I left it too late. So,
when is your birthday and a year of your birth?
my birthday's in August, and the year of my birth was 1935, a very long time ago.
As a child, where were you born and raised?
I was raised in the Sudan, where my father was attached to the Sudanese Defence Force. And when the Italians moved into North Africa, the women and children were evacuated, and we went to Kenya as it was then, which my mother did not enjoy at all. White mischief time, and not to her taste at all. I loved it. I loved it as a child. You know, bare feet all this time, running around, but it wasn't to be. And then in I think it was 1944, my mother was an only child, and we did this crazy journey back from Kenya to Hampshire, where my grandmother was there. The reason for this was my mother was an only child, and her mother had cancer, and my father was then posted back to Europe. So there was. But it took 7 weeks to get from Mombasa with the German U-boats all coming through the military convoy, the troop ship we were on. And I think it was all a bit of a shock, coming back to cold and dreary England.
So you were actually born in Sudan, were you?
No, I was actually born in the military hospital in Aldershot on leave, but I spent my first 5 years there.
And did you have any brothers or sisters growing up?
Yes, I have 2 younger brothers. I was the eldest and the only girl, and the brother closest to me sadly died very suddenly 10 years ago now, but my youngest brother is still with me.
What is your earliest memory of going to the cinema or the theatre?
Oh, my earliest memory of cinema was seeing Bambi as a child when I must have been about 6 or 7, and I still remember the fire and all the animals fleeing. I haven't seen it since, but I think I would feel the same about it now. It was very scary to a child.
And growing up, did you have a favourite actor or actress whose work you really admired? Maybe a radio star?
Well, Dick Barton, of course, as a child. But we lived in the country once we were back in England, and there wasn't any theatre available. I do remember seeing, my mother took me to see Margaret Leighton in separate tables, and that I do remember still very well. In London, we came to London for a treat.
It may well have been that theatre production, but was there an actual event or trigger that first prompted you to seriously consider acting?
Oh yes.
As a profession, and how old do you think you were?
Because I was a very asthmatic child, and there were no grammar schools anywhere near us, I was sent away to boarding school by the sea in Seaford, which I absolutely hated. But the science mistress had a passion for putting on plays, and although I was hopeless at science, that was my outlet at school. And being tall and skinny, I played all the male leads at this girls' boarding school. And it was the one thing that I was really happy doing at this detested boarding school. Yes, that was it.
Did you ever attend a stage school or audition or formally train to be an actress anywhere?
Not until I'd been through university here, and I got a so-called research fellowship for a graduate year in America at Smith College, one of the top Ivy League colleges. That was in 1950, that must be 1956, from 1956 to 1957. And although I'd been for one audition and did not get the job at Oxford, I started acting again in America, and the drama teacher at Smith told me that the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art kept 10 places for Americans every year. I think it was part of the post-war gratitude scheme. So I thought, I wrote to John Fernald, the head of RADA, and said, I'm here in the States, can I audition here? And he said yes. So I had to go down to New York in this little off-Broadway theatre. I was so green that I remember moving the one chair on the stage as far away from the light as I could. Anyway, I think I was just an oddity, and they accepted me as one of the 10. So I went to RADA in 1957.
Either before you began your acting career, or maybe when you were between roles at any time, what other non-acting jobs have you done?
Oh, well, at university I worked at the local gardening shop, flower shop, and what else have I done? And post that, I did. I was teaching at the Arts Educational School while it was at the Barbican. There's the acting part of it, and when my daughter was small.
What was your first ever paid acting performance, i.e. your professional debut? And again, how old were you?
Oh, goodness, how old was I? Well, it was 1960, so you can work that out. It was 1960 with James Rhys Evans, and I was on the book, stage managing for one of his very early productions in a pub somewhere in Hampstead, on The Dumb Waiter, Pinter's wonderful little play, and then a play that was written for Sian Phillips called The King's Daughter, I think, was some such name. Anyway, Jimmy was so good to me. I'd met him, though never worked with him, at drama school, and he said if he got the job at Pitlochry, I would be part of the company. So Pitlochry was my first job up in Scotland, and it was a most wonderful way to get started. And then I think he must have spoken to a wonderful theatre manager called Peter Rogers. That's Pieter. And thanks to Peter's belief in me, I got auditioned for the very first company at Chichester under Laurence Olivier. And I went through three lots of auditions, and Olivier himself came to the last one and stopped me on both pieces I was doing. So I thought, oh well, that's it, you know. It was a nice try. But to my amazement, I got accepted into this amazing company, mostly Olivier's old friends. And what a privilege that was, to work with that company not only Olivier, but Sharon Plowright was, of course, part of the company, and Sybil Thorndike, Lewis Carroll, people of such quality and experience. And I was understudying Athene Seiler and Faye Compton, and it was the most amazing summer, because it was quite a relatively small company, and Olivier had got it all off on the right foot, in the sense of, at the very first rehearsal, he went round the circle gathered there, introducing us all by name, individually. And he'd met me for, I don't know, probably about 2 minutes in the theatre, so at a distance. And he can only have known all our names so fluently by studying our photographs. There's no other way he could have done it. But the fact that he'd taken made the effort to do that really brought everyone so close together. It was a lovely way to start off.
So you're talking there about starting off. Can you remember how old you were, or what production you were working on, when someone first asked you for an autograph?
No, I have no idea. No idea.
And as a young actress, did you put much thought into the construction of your signature or not?
No, my signature was my signature. I mean, I wasn't a teenager anymore, you know. So, no, not for a moment.
You mentioned a number of great names there, but the question is thus: at any point in your life or your career, have you ever been starstruck when meeting someone famous? And have you ever asked anyone for their autograph?
No. I wouldn't say so. I will be eternally grateful to people like, James Rhys Evans, for one, who gave me my first start, and Peggy Ashcroft, who was responsible for me, I think, getting the part in The Jewel and the Crown, and then later my very first West End show. Lloyd George knew my father. And yes, I think Peggy Ashcroft, she cared about younger people, actors and actresses, and our friendship was enhanced by my daughter being the same age as her granddaughter, who didn't at the time speak much English, so they became quite close friends. And yes. And then, of course, I had the privilege of working with Judi Dench a great deal, both first of all at Nottingham Playhouse, and then at the RAC, and later as time goes by.
Janet, are you one for collecting any memorabilia or any collectibles throughout your career? And what, if anything, do you still have in your possession today?
Well, one of the most precious things to me was a handwritten letter from Laurence Olivier. Written when he was on holiday, when the season finished, he wrote to every single, I'm sure he must, if he was writing to me as the sort of younger branch of the company, he would have written to everyone. And that handwritten letter, which I've now given for auction at a suitable moment to an actors' charity called Safety Curtain, and that sprang out of a subcommittee of equity which Peggy invited me to join at its inception in the late 60s. And out of that, the International Committee for Artists' Freedom, it was called, and one of our very earliest jobs was support for actors after the coup in Chile in September 73. And we did such work. It was like a campaigning organisation, much like Amnesty. So that letter is now waiting to raise money for. I used to treat myself to, when we were on tour, I used to pick up things from antique shops and things, just as a sort of memorabilia of that particular tour and play. And I'm sure I've got some of them still knocking around, but no, not.
Janet, to perform, what would you choose? Theatre, television or cinema? And what reasons would you give for your answer?
Theatre. A theatre and a good script. There is nothing like it. When I first, again thanks to Peggy Ashcroft, who did not want, she was too old at that point, to cope with the thing of television. When I first got the script of Singing Detective, 6 hours worth all arrived at the same time, I could not put it down. I read straight through the whole caboodle. And as the teacher, obviously someone that had deeply affected Dennis Potter, a really, on one level, awful woman. She was a bully. And there was a speech, a prayer, that went on for pages and pages. And I thought, how will I ever learn that? It was absolutely no problem because it was so organically written. It all fell into place, and lines were not a problem written like that, like his magic ear. So, but even in an indifferent script, which my first West End show was with a family scene. Lord George knew my father. Not a very well written play, but while we were rehearsing, Peggy and Ralph between them brought it from a 3-act play down to a 2-act play. My memories from that show were mostly of Ralph Richardson's amazing skills in playing an audience. It made me think of a fisherman playing a fish on a... He could do anything with that audience. And sometime into the run, I was sitting next to him. It was a after-dinner coffee scene. And he suddenly, in a laugh, he said to me, "What's my next line, my dear?" And at that point in the run, you knew the whole play somewhere in one's head. And I gave him a few words of the next line, and he took it, played it, got another laugh, and in that laugh he said, "Thank you, my dear." To have that technique and control, any other actor, myself included, would have probably been so obsessed with the horror of drying on a line that one would have gone again, but not Ralph. He was always in control of his performance, really. And I think that experience of having a live audience, of it all being in the moment, was something you don't get in any other medium, no.
So Janet, which of your past performances or characters would you say people remember you for the most?
I think inevitably it must be As Time Goes By, in which I played a rather eccentric housekeeper when Judi and Dench and Geoffrey went to the countryside. I was doing a show in San Francisco with Marianne Faithfull much later, and it wasn't the show that I got stopped in the street for. they would always call out to me, said, "How's the weather, Mrs Bale?" And of course it wasn't the weather I was concerned with, it was the shipping forecast. Bob Larby, another absolutely wonderful light comedy writer, who Sidney Lotterby directed all his shows, I think, on television for BBC. And this Mrs Bale was fairly obsessive about the times of serving up a meal. She was also very obsessed with the shipping forecast. And there's a rather wonderful book which Bob Larby gave me at some point about all the ports that the shipping forecast gives you. I was, before that, and even since, I love the shipping forecast. All these exotic names like German Bite and so on. And so when I hear the shipping forecast on I can't remember which, is it Sunday evening? Saturday or Sunday evening, they still do it. It reminds me of very happy times with this marvellous little group of people. I mean, a dresser once said to me, this is the kind of show you'd pay to be included on. Yeah. And we all loved it. Yeah.
So taking more of an introspective view, whether it be for what you did on stage or screen, can you name any of your own individual performance or performances that you are personally the most proudest of?
I'm in television, I guess it was probably The Singing Detective, because she was an extreme character. But in the theatre, it's hard to say. At the time of the Vietnam War, I met a group of Americans living in Paris to get away, theatre workers, and Lee Brewer, the auteur, I guess he was, of a company which was later called Mabou Mines, wanted to put on Mother Courage, and he couldn't find an actor that could handle it, really. It is a mammoth part. And I met him. I'd expected to go over just for the day, but in fact we stayed up all night talking about our values in life, I suppose, and things. Anyway, I ended up being offered the part and took it, and how I hadn't had children at that point, and I very much wished that I could have played it again after I had had children. But it is a very demanding role. You have to, unlike the moving stage that you have here, we created that setting. They found an old cart in the countryside somewhere and put it all together again. And Ralph Mannheim was living in Paris at that time, and the best-known Brechtian scholar really worked with us, and a young German that was working for the radio, French radio, had did a literal translation for us, and then Ralph shaped it a bit. Philip Glass was studying in Paris at the time, and so started us off on the music. Another one, very, very different, and which came as a great surprise and treat to me, was Letters and Lovage at the West Yorkshire Playhouse with Deborah Norton. I had presumed that I would be playing the rather more straight-laced Lovage. So I went to the audition in a suit, and only to find that Deborah wanted to play that part. So I was going to play the Maggie Smith part, Letters. And that, who was a very eccentric character. And I had such a lot of fun with her. And yes, that was... And working with Deborah Norton was also a great joy, and so very happy memories of that too.
Is there a significant part or role that you still remember today, Janet, that you auditioned for and really wanted but didn't get?
No, I can't think of anything. I mean, past history is history. You don't carry it with you onto the next one. No, I think the answer is clearly no.
And it may well be to do with your schedule or filming commitments elsewhere, but is there a part that you had to turn down, but again, later regretted that decision?
No, is the quick answer to that. I did turn down working with Robert Wilson for the third time of the same piece, the Tom Waits musical called The Black Rider, which I'd already done at the Barbican, and also a 6-week stint in San Francisco. I'd been offered separate tables at Manchester by Sarah Frankham, and I chose to do that and turned down going to LA. So I've never been to Hollywood, never been to LA. But I never regretted that decision, not for one moment. I learnt a lot from doing separate tables with Sarah, and I even got an award for it. No regrets.
You've mentioned a number of great names already, but is there a co-star that you liked working with the most, and maybe a little bit more controversial, any that you had a tougher time with, namely those that you didn't like?
There are very few I didn't like. Yes, there are too many to name, really. I think it's a very privileged life, starting out when I did in the 60s, where the arts were still regarded as important to public education, really, in society as a whole. I realise now how very blessed we were during that period of 60s, 70s, even into the 80s, and I was particularly lucky in the way I started, which gave me such a good send-off. Yeah.
Rather than asking you who your favourite director was or is, I'll ask it in a slightly different way. Outline what a director needs to do to get the best performance out of Janet Henfrey.
Well, presumably they have cast you, so they must trust you, And I think believing in you and trusting you to do your work. And if you need to have a discussion of a particular interpretation, that they can listen to your point of view, and ultimately it is, of course, their decision. You have to work together on that. And I think very often the best directors are the ones who've started out life being actors. And so they understand their job from the actor's point of view as well as their own, which obviously changes slightly. So that is the kind of director that I would gladly work for again.
If you could relive one moment from your career once again, whether it be a period of your career or a particular production, what would you choose?
What immediately comes to mind is The Winter's Tale, the famous Winter's Tale that Trevor Nunn directed at the RSC, with Judi Dench playing both Hermione and Perdita, i.e. mother and daughter, with someone else in a mask, in a Judi mask, for when they both appeared together. Partly because of the quality of the production and the fact we did it for so long. Over 2 years, including the tour to Japan, the first theatre company ever to go there, and the concentration of those audiences were absolutely magical. And they fully understood the notion behind the production. You could tell that from the reviews they pinned up a translation of backstage. So I think that was, and the privilege of doing Shakespeare, which doesn't come very often these days because of the cost of mounting it, the size of the casts. So yeah, that one.
A little bit of a left field one, Janet. You're hosting an intimate dinner party and you're able to invite 3 guests to come along, alive or dead, within the profession, outside of the profession. Who would you choose to invite and why?
Well, the names that came to mind immediately to me were Mandela and Bishop Tutu. I think Bishop Tutu, who once I read as one of his faults was flirting. One of his great sins was flirting. I thought that was so enchanting. And what an amazing achievement they both made to South Africa. And I think for those reasons I would definitely have them. They get on well together, I'm sure, and of my professional friends, that's a bit harder. I'd like so many of them to come, really, and talk about old times. I suppose Peggy Ashcroft would be my first choice.
Fantastic. Looking back over your career, do you have any regrets? If you had your time again, would you have done anything differently or made any different choices at any stage?
No regrets. no regrets of that nature. In other, there are one or two, but no, absolutely. I think I was very, very lucky throughout the where I started and all that wonderful time with Olivier in the company. Sybil Thorndike, during that summer, in a little company meeting at the end, talked about love for a project that was bigger than yourself. And she'd had a wonderful life and career at that point, but she could still submerge herself into the idea of this wonderful project, opening a new theatre in the country, miles from London, and that has stayed with me always.
Great. Tell us something about you, Janet, that nobody would know. Do you have any hobbies, pastimes, passions that you have a keen interest for?
Yes. Human rights. I have chosen to work in the area of performers. Now I am only an honorary trustee because of my history of human rights work within equity and then leading on to the charity of Safety Curtain. We are so privileged in this country, although times are hard for actors and performers here. At least we live in a relatively safe country, and we have unemployment benefit and sickness benefit. So, yeah, human rights in general. I mean, I think I was a founder member of Amnesty. I've always donated blood until they turned me down because my blood wasn't good enough. I needed it myself, they said. So, yeah, I just feel a very privileged and lucky life.
So, having enjoyed a career over 60 plus years, Janet, what are your overarching memories of the career that you've had?
In general, very happy and a sense of great privilege to do the job that one loves or one's life. I think is not given to many people these days, and so I feel very lucky. Not that I do consciously look back, but I am very aware that I've had a very happy and privileged life.
So bringing us up to present day, Janet, finish the sentence. What happened to the actress Janet Henfrey?
Well, she's still here, rather to her surprise, and living in a nice house and tilling her garden, as Candide says. My years do not allow me to be very active these days, which makes me sad, but when the sun shines, it's a dark world out there, and I think one has to keep doing one's bit, and I feel very lucky to be able to still be here and doing what I can.
So Janet Henfrey, thank you very much.
You're most welcome.